The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft orange and pink hues. Marcus drove his old blue pickup truck down the quiet road, humming along to his favorite song on the radio. It had been a long day at the construction site, and he was eager to get home to his wife and daughter. Suddenly, the wail of a police siren pierced the air. Marcus glanced in his rearview mirror and saw flashing red and blue lights. Confused, he pulled over to the side of the road. Officer Ryan stepped out of the patrol car, his expression hard and cold. "License and registration," he barked, his hand resting on his holster. Marcus nodded politely, reaching for his wallet. But before he could hand over the documents, Ryan leaned in closer. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered sharply. "Is there a problem, officer?" Marcus asked, his voice calm but uneasy. "Don't ask questions. Do as you're told," Ryan snapped. The tension thickened as Marcus obeyed, stepping onto the pavement. Without warning, Ryan shoved him. "What's this for?" Marcus asked, startled. "Stop resisting," Ryan shouted, though Marcus hadn't moved. And then, before Marcus could react, the officer's fist collided with his jaw. The world seemed to freeze as bystanders across the street pulled out their phones, recording every second of what was happening. Before we dive into this powerful story, make sure to subscribe to our channel so you never miss more inspiring and thought-provoking videos like this one. Your support helps us share impactful stories that matter. Now, let's get started. Marcus Robinson was a man who believed in kindness. At 35 years old, he had built a simple yet fulfilling life in a small southern town. He worked as a foreman at a local construction company, a job that was tough on his body but brought him pride. His colleagues admired him for his leadership and fairness, while his family adored him for his warmth. Marcus lived in a modest house with his wife, Jasmine, and their 8-year-old daughter, Mia. Jasmine was a school teacher, and Mia, full of life and curiosity, wanted to be an artist when she grew up. Their weekends were spent at the park, where Marcus often played basketball with neighborhood kids or hosted barbecues that brought the community together. Marcus was more than just a family man. He was a pillar of the community. He volunteered at the local youth center, mentoring young boys and teaching them the value of hard work and respect. Having grown up in a poor neighborhood himself, Marcus knew the struggles of being overlooked and underestimated. His dream was simple: to provide a better future for Mia and to inspire others to rise above their circumstances. But despite his kindness and hard work, Marcus wasn't blind to the challenges that came with being a black man in America. He knew the world could be unjust, but he believed in the power of good people standing together. In stark contrast, Officer Ryan Miller was a man shaped by bitterness. Raised in a rigid, conservative household, Ryan had grown up hearing his father complain about how things were changing too fast. His father, a retired police officer, often lamented the good old days when he claimed people knew their place. Ryan idolized his father and followed in his footsteps, joining the police force at 22. At first, he wanted to make a difference, but the culture in his precinct quickly hardened him. Surrounded by colleagues who often spoke in racial stereotypes and encouraged aggression, Ryan's initial idealism faded. By the time he was in his 30s, Ryan had developed a chip on his shoulder. He believed the world had become too soft and thought many people, especially those from marginalized communities, used discrimination as an excuse. His insecurities and frustrations fueled his actions, and he often took out his anger on those he stopped on duty. Ryan's colleagues joked about his short temper, calling him Hothead Miller, but no one reported him. The system protected him, and he grew bolder with time. The lives of Marcus and Ryan couldn't have been more different. While Marcus worked to lift others, Ryan carried the weight of his prejudice and insecurities. The day of their fateful encounter started like any other. Marcus kissed Jasmine goodbye and dropped Mia off at school before heading to the construction site. The day was long, filled with deadlines and hard labor, but Marcus didn't mind. Meanwhile, Ryan was having a rough shift. He'd been reprimanded by his superior for a minor mistake and was still stewing about it when he got back into his patrol car. "Just another soft leader who doesn't get it," he muttered under his breath. As he drove through the quiet streets, he spotted Marcus's truck and decided to pull it over. There was no real reason for the stop. Ryan simply assumed the worst when he saw a black man in an old truck. It was a small town, and Ryan thought he knew who belonged and who didn't. His prejudice and frustration combined in a dangerous way, setting the stage for what was about to unfold. Marcus, on the other hand, had no idea why he was being pulled over. He wasn't speeding. His registration was up to date, and he hadn't broken any rules. He reminded himself to stay calm and polite, something he had taught Mia to do in the rare event she was ever confronted by authority. But as Marcus stepped out of the truck that evening, he couldn't have imagined how quickly things would spiral out of control. Marcus stepped out of his truck as Officer Ryan had demanded, his heart racing but his expression calm. He was used to keeping his emotions in check, especially in situations like this. His father had taught him as a young boy, "Always stay calm and polite, son. Don't give them a reason." The gravel crunched under Marcus's boots as he stood by his truck, hands visible at his sides. "What seems to be the problem, officer?" he asked, keeping his voice steady. Ryan didn't answer immediately. He adjusted his belt and gave Marcus a once-over, his eyes narrowing as if he was looking for trouble. "You were swerving," he finally said, though it wasn't true. Marcus frowned. "Swerving? I don't think—" "Don't argue with me," Ryan cut him off sharply. "Are you drinking? Doing drugs?" The accusation stunned Marcus. He opened his mouth to deny it, but quickly shut it again, sensing the officer's hostility. Instead, he shook his head calmly. "No, sir. I just came from work. You can check my truck." But Ryan didn't care about explanations. He stepped closer, invading Marcus's personal space. "Put your hands on the hood of the truck," he barked. "Why?" Marcus asked, his confusion growing. He wasn't resisting, but he also didn't understand why this was escalating. Ryan's voice rose. "I said, put your hands on the truck." People across the street started to notice. A young woman walking her dog stopped and pulled out her phone, her brow furrowing at the officer's tone. A man sitting in his car across the road began recording as well, sensing that something wasn't right. Marcus hesitated, looking at the officer's tense expression. He raised his hand slightly in a gesture of compliance. "All right, I'll do what you say. I'm not trying to cause trouble." But Ryan didn't want calm. He wanted control. Before Marcus could even place his hands on the truck, Ryan grabbed him by the arm and yanked him roughly. Marcus stumbled, his heart pounding. "Hey, there's no need for that," he protested, his voice still measured despite the fear building in his chest. Ryan's grip tightened. "Stop resisting," he shouted. "I'm not resisting," Marcus replied, his voice shaken now. He glanced around, noticing the small crowd forming. A few more phones were out, recording everything, and then it happened. Ryan's fist flew forward, landing squarely on Marcus's jaw. The impact was sudden and brutal, sending Marcus staggering back against his truck. His ears rang and his vision blurred for a moment. Gasps erupted from the onlookers. "What are you doing?" someone shouted. Marcus held his cheek, the pain sharp and burning. He looked at Ryan, disbelief written all over his face. "Why did you hit me?" he asked, his voice cracking with humiliation and anger. Ryan didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed Marcus again, this time twisting his arm behind his back. "You're under arrest for resisting a police officer," he said coldly. The crowd was no longer silent. Shouts of protest filled the air. "He wasn't resisting," yelled a middle-aged man with a baseball cap. "You saw that, right? He just hit him for no reason," a young woman said, her phone capturing every second. Marcus felt a wave of emotions crashing over him. Fear, anger, shame. His mind raced. What if this gets worse? What if I don't make it home to my family? But amidst his fear, there was something else. Hope. He could see the cameras pointed at him, hear the voices of the people standing up for him. Ryan, however, seemed oblivious to the growing outrage. He shoved Marcus against the truck, snapping handcuffs around his wrists. "You think you're tough, huh?" Ryan muttered, his voice dripping with disdain. The crowd edged closer, their shouts growing louder. "Let him go! We're recording everything!" Marcus looked at the faces in the crowd, their expressions filled with anger and determination. Though his body ached and his pride was wounded, he stood a little taller. He wasn't alone. As Ryan pushed him toward the patrol car, Marcus caught the eye of a young man in the crowd who nodded at him. It was a small gesture, but it gave Marcus strength. The confrontation was over, but the fight had just begun. The video of the incident spread like wildfire. Within hours, the clip of Officer Ryan punching Marcus was circulating on social media. The hashtags #JusticeForMarcus and #End Police Brutality began trending nationwide, and the small town where it happened suddenly became the center of a national conversation about racism and abuse of power. Marcus sat in his living room with an ice pack pressed against his swollen jaw. His wife, Jasmine, sat beside him, holding his hand tightly, while Mia, unaware of the gravity of the situation, played with her crayons on the floor. The phone on the table wouldn't stop buzzing. Friends, family, and even strangers were reaching out to show their support. "Marcus," Jasmine said softly, her voice trembling, "the whole world is watching this now. People are standing up for you." Marcus sighed deeply. He didn't feel like a symbol of anything. He felt humiliated, angry, and tired. The video may have gone viral, but he was the one who'd been punched, handcuffed, and treated like a criminal. "I didn't ask for this," he said, shaking his head. "I just want to live my life in peace." Jasmine placed her hand on his cheek, gently brushing a tear away. "I know, but this isn't just about you anymore. It's about all of us, about Mia, about the kids you mentor, about every person who's been through this and never got justice." The next morning, Marcus's face was on the front page of the local newspaper, and news trucks lined the street outside his home. Journalists knocked on the door, hoping to get a statement. Marcus stayed inside, avoiding the cameras. Meanwhile, protests began to erupt across the town. People of all races and backgrounds gathered at the park holding signs that read "Justice for Marcus" and "Stop Police Violence." Marcus's co-workers, neighbors, and even the kids from the youth center stood in solidarity. On the third day, a group of community leaders approached Marcus and Jasmine, urging them to take legal action. "We need to hold him accountable," said Pastor James, a respected figure in the community. "If we let this slide, it'll keep happening." Marcus hesitated. He had always believed in solving problems peacefully, but this wasn't just about him anymore. His name was being chanted in the streets, his face shared in posts with captions calling him a hero. It was overwhelming. "What if nothing changes?" Marcus asked, his voice heavy with doubt. "Nothing will change if you don't stand up," Jasmine replied firmly. Later that evening, Marcus sat at the dining table, staring at the pile of notes and flowers left on his doorstep by supporters. Mia came over and climbed onto his lap, wrapping her tiny arms around his neck. "Daddy, are you okay?" she asked, her innocent eyes full of concern. Marcus hugged her tightly. "I'm okay, baby," he said, though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. By the end of the week, Marcus decided to take a stand. With the help of a local civil rights lawyer, he filed a formal complaint against Officer Ryan and the police department. The announcement sparked even more media coverage, and Marcus reluctantly agreed to give a brief interview. Sitting in front of the cameras, Marcus spoke from the heart. "I never wanted any of this," he said, his voice steady despite his nerves. "But this isn't just about me. It's about making sure my daughter grows up in a world where people are treated with respect, no matter what they look like. No one should feel afraid just because of the color of their skin." The interview went viral, and Marcus's words resonated with people across the country. Celebrities, activists, and even politicians began to voice their support. Donations poured in to help cover legal fees, and Marcus's family was overwhelmed by the outpouring of love. But not everyone was on his side. There were those who defended Officer Ryan, claiming he was just doing his job. The police department released a statement saying they would investigate the incident thoroughly, but many saw it as an attempt to deflect responsibility. The backlash weighed heavily on Marcus. He received hateful messages online, and a few anonymous threats made him fear for his family's safety. "Am I doing the right thing?" he asked Jasmine one night. "Yes," she replied without hesitation. "You're standing up for what's right, Marcus. That's never easy, but it's always worth it." The protests continued to grow, drawing attention from national media outlets. Crowds chanted Marcus's name outside the police department, demanding that Officer Ryan be held accountable. Despite the fear and pressure, Marcus found strength in the voices of those who believed in him. For the first time since the incident, he began to feel hope. Maybe, just maybe, this fight could lead to something bigger than himself. The house was quiet that night, but Marcus's mind was anything but. He sat alone at the dining table, staring at the stack of letters and notes of encouragement from strangers. The words were kind. "You're brave. You're making a difference. We stand with you." But they didn't silence the storm inside him. He rubbed his temples, trying to ease the tension that had settled there since the incident. His jaw still ached from the punch, a painful reminder of how quickly things had spiraled out of control. No matter how hard he tried, the scene kept replaying in his head. The flashing lights, the officers shouting, the feel of the cold handcuffs digging into his wrists. "Are you coming to bed?" Jasmine's voice broke through his thoughts. She stood in the doorway, her face etched with concern. Marcus shook his head. "Not yet," he said quietly. Jasmine walked over and sat down across from him. She reached for his hand, her touch gentle but firm. "You're doing the right thing," she said. Marcus let out a heavy sigh. "Am I? What if this just makes things worse? What if they come after us, after you and Mia?" Jasmine's eyes softened. "I won't lie to you, Marcus. It's scary, but we can't let fear stop us from doing what's right. You've always told Mia to stand up for herself. Now you have to show her what that looks like." Marcus looked away, his chest tightening. He thought about Mia, her bright smile and the way she hugged him so tightly every morning before school. He wanted her to grow up in a better world, but he also wanted to keep her safe. "I just don't know if it'll change anything," Marcus said after a long pause. "How many times have we seen this happen? People protest, they march, but nothing really changes. What if all of this is for nothing?" Jasmine leaned forward, her voice steady and filled with resolve. "It's not for nothing. Every fight, every step forward matters. Maybe it won't fix everything, but it's a start. And you're not alone in this. Look at all the people standing with you. Look at the support you've gotten." Marcus nodded slowly, though the doubt lingered. He knew Jasmine was right, but the weight of it all felt unbearable. The hateful messages he'd received online played on a loop in his mind, each one a reminder that not everyone wanted to see justice served. The next morning, Marcus took Mia to school, something he hadn't done since the incident. She skipped beside him, her backpack bouncing on her small shoulders. "Daddy," she said, looking up at him, "are you still sad?" Marcus stopped walking and knelt down to her level. He forced a small smile. "I'm okay, sweetheart. I just have a lot on my mind." Mia frowned, her tiny brow furrowing. "Because of that bad man?" Marcus's heart sank. He hated that she even knew about it. "Yes, baby, but I'm working on it. Don't you worry about that, okay?" "Okay," Mia said, wrapping her arms around his neck. "I love you, Daddy." "I love you too," Marcus whispered, holding her tightly. As he watched her run into the school building, a thought struck him. If he didn't stand up now, what kind of world would Mia inherit? The fear in his heart was real, but so was his determination to make things better for her. That evening, Marcus sat down with Pastor James, one of the community leaders who had been supporting him. The two men talked over coffee in Marcus's living room, the weight of their conversation heavy in the air. "I'm scared, Pastor," Marcus admitted. "I'm scared for my family, for what people might do, and I don't even know if this fight is winnable." Pastor James nodded, his expression understanding. "I won't tell you not to be scared, Marcus. Fear is natural. But courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what's right even when you are. You have a chance to make a difference here, not just for yourself, but for everyone in this town and beyond." Marcus stared into his coffee, the steam swirling in the air. "But what if I fail?" "Then you fail knowing you stood up for what was right," Pastor James said firmly. "And that's more than most people ever do. Don't underestimate the power of your voice, Marcus. People are listening." Later that night, Marcus sat on the edge of his bed, his thoughts still racing. Jasmine joined him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You're not alone in this," she reminded him. "We're in this together." Marcus nodded, finally allowing a small smile to tug at the corners of his lips. The fear was still there, but so was the hope. For the first time in days, he felt a flicker of clarity. "I'll do it," he said quietly. "I'll fight. Not just for me, but for you, for Mia, and for everyone watching." Jasmine squeezed his hand. "That's the man I fell in love with." As Marcus lay down that night, he closed his eyes and took a deep breath. The road ahead was uncertain and filled with challenges, but he was ready to take the first step. The first step in Marcus's battle for justice began with a meeting at the office of his lawyer, Denise Carter. Denise was a well-known civil rights attorney, a woman who had dedicated her career to holding those in power accountable. Sitting across from her in the small, cluttered office, Marcus felt a mix of hope and anxiety. "Marcus," Denise began, her voice calm but firm, "this won't be an easy fight. Cases like these rarely are. The system is designed to protect people like Officer Ryan, and we're going to face a lot of pushback. Are you ready for that?" Marcus hesitated, glancing at Jasmine, who gave him a reassuring nod. He took a deep breath and met Denise's gaze. "I'm ready," he said, his voice steady. Denise smiled faintly. "Good, because this isn't just about you. It's about sending a message that this kind of behavior won't be tolerated. We'll start by filing a formal lawsuit against Officer Ryan and the police department for excessive force and discrimination." As the lawsuit was filed, the story gained even more traction. News outlets ran headlines about Marcus's fight for justice, and legal experts weighed in on the challenges he would face. The police department responded with a statement denying any wrongdoing and claiming that Officer Ryan had acted within protocol. It was the kind of vague, deflective language Marcus had expected, but it still stung. Denise worked tirelessly to build the case, gathering eyewitness accounts, video evidence, and Marcus's medical records. She also dug into Officer Ryan's history, uncovering several prior complaints of excessive force, most of which had been quietly dismissed. "This is a pattern," Denise explained during one of their meetings. "It's not just about what happened to you, it's about holding someone accountable for years of abuse." Marcus nodded, but the weight of it all was beginning to take its toll. The hateful messages online had intensified, and a few people had even shown up outside his house, shouting slurs and threats. The fear he'd tried so hard to push aside was creeping back in. Despite the challenges, Marcus found strength in the support of his community. The protests continued to grow, with hundreds of people marching through the streets, chanting for justice. Signs bearing Marcus's name and messages like "No justice, no peace" were held high. At one rally, Marcus was invited to speak. Standing in front of the crowd, his heart pounded in his chest. Public speaking wasn't something he was comfortable with, but as he looked out at the faces of people who believed in him, he found his voice. "This fight isn't just about me," he said, his voice trembling at first but growing stronger with each word. "It's about every person who's ever been treated like they don't matter. It's about standing up and saying, 'Enough is enough.' I'm scared, just like many of you are. But together, we're stronger than any fear." The crowd erupted in cheers, and for the first time, Marcus felt the power of his own voice. The court hearings were grueling. Officer Ryan's legal team argued that he had acted in self-defense, claiming Marcus had been non-compliant and aggressive. Watching Ryan sit calmly in the courtroom, showing no remorse, made Marcus's blood boil. But Denise had prepared him for this. During the trial, the video footage taken by bystanders became a key piece of evidence. As it was played in court, showing Ryan's unprovoked aggression, the room fell silent. The prosecutor tried to argue that the video didn't capture the full context, but Denise countered with testimony from eyewitnesses who confirmed Marcus's innocence. As the trial went on, Marcus began to see the cracks in the system more clearly. The biases, the excuses, the unwillingness to hold certain people accountable. It was exhausting, but it also fueled his determination. Outside the courtroom, Marcus continued to grow as a person. He leaned on his family and friends, finding strength in their unwavering support. He began speaking at schools and community centers, sharing his story and encouraging others to stand up against injustice. Through it all, he realized something important. While the fight for justice was about holding Officer Ryan accountable, it was also about creating change that would outlast this one case. He wanted to inspire others to demand better, to believe that their voices mattered. Finally, after weeks of testimony, arguments, and emotional exhaustion, the verdict was announced. Marcus sat in the courtroom, holding Jasmine's hand tightly. The jury found Officer Ryan guilty of excessive force and recommended disciplinary action against the police department for failing to address prior complaints. While the punishment wasn't as severe as Marcus had hoped, it was a step forward, a victory that sent a message. Outside the courthouse, the crowd erupted in cheers as Marcus stepped out with Jasmine and Denise. Reporters swarmed around him, but he ignored their questions, turning instead to the people who had stood by him. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "This is just the beginning. Together, we can create a better future." And in that moment, Marcus knew that the fight for justice was far from over, but he was ready to keep going. The courtroom was silent as the judge announced the verdict. Officer Ryan had been found guilty of excessive force, and the police department was ordered to implement mandatory anti-bias training and review its handling of complaints. While the punishment wasn't as harsh as Marcus had hoped, it was a step in the right direction, a small but significant crack in the wall of systemic injustice. As Marcus walked out of the courthouse hand in hand with Jasmine and Mia, he was greeted by cheers from the crowd. The faces in the crowd weren't just his neighbors, they were people from all walks of life who had come together for a common cause. For the first time in weeks, Marcus felt a sense of peace. He had done what he could, and now the community was carrying the torch forward. Back at home that evening, Marcus sat on the porch with Jasmine, watching Mia play in the yard. The weight on his shoulders had lifted, replaced by a quiet resolve. "This isn't the end," he said softly. "There's still so much work to do." Jasmine nodded, her eyes full of pride. "But you've shown people that it's possible to stand up and fight." The case had changed Marcus, his family, and the community. It had reminded them that resilience could spark change, that accountability was a fight worth pursuing, and that the voices of ordinary people could challenge the most entrenched systems. Together, they were stronger, and together, they would keep moving forward.